My name's Simon Fleming. I am an orthopedic surgeon, and I've been asked today to talk about some of the more nuanced aspects around bullying and culture and things like that. The first thing is it's quite an emotive term, bullying. There's no real recognized definition, actually. Even in the UK, there's not a legal definition. And often what you find is that when people talk about bullying, what they try to do is frame it in the context of harassment or discrimination, where there are legal definitions, to try and give it some sort of meaning so that it doesn't sound like someone just going, well, they weren't nice to me. As far as I'm concerned, bullying is about power and about silence. It's about making people feel or do, or not feel or not do something, and taking away their voice, taking away their ability to speak up, taking away their autonomy. What you might hear is language around things like undermining. Undermining is different. It's more insidious. Undermining is where you make someone feel small, worthless, undervalued. I'm big, you're small. I'm smart, you're dumb. And then, as I said, you get discrimination and harassment. Those are around the protected characteristics that you hear a lot about. There are 9 of them: age, sex, gender, race, etc. Harassment is where you offend someone, attack someone for those protected characteristics. And discrimination is where you treat someone differently because of them. Now, today, I've been asked to talk about a couple of things, like the difference between incivility and bullying. And what I would say is that the thing with incivility is that when people talk about incivility, they're often talking about rudeness. They're talking about a lack of kindness. And incivility and bullying are not, different things. They're just 2 sides of the same coin. It's about what happens when respect disappears. And people often say, well, you can call bullying an incivility just not being very nice. And why does that matter? What I would say to you is, oh yeah, it matters. So for example, if I'm on the receiving end of bullying, of incivility, I receive it. What we know is that 80% of recipients of these behaviors, a lack of respect, 80% of them will spend time during their day worrying about it. We know that 40% of recipients of incivility, a lack of respect, bullying, will reduce the quality of their work. And we know that 50% will reduce their time at work. They will take sick days. They will find reasons not to be there. What's interesting is we also know that 25% of the recipients will take it out on service users. For you, that is your patients, that are the animal, that are the owners. However, in the same token, what we know is that incivility, bullying, a lack of respect, and abuse of power has an effect on those who witness it too. We know that 20% of witnesses to these behaviors, their performance will go down. They will do their job less well. 50% of witnesses to these behaviors will be less willing to help others, and 75% of witnesses will be less enthusiastic about their job, about the organization, about the practice. So what we're saying is incivility, bullying, a lack of respect isn't just like, oh, a lack of niceness. These behaviors cause direct harm. Now, I've only got a short time today, so I should probably focus on what you can do about it. There's 2 things I would ask people to do. The first is, don't be a passive bystander. What you permit, you promote. Now, that's not to say that you're in some way complicit in this, because Maya Angelou says, you know, do the best you can do until you know better. But once you know better, do better. So instead, be an active bystander. If you witness these behaviors, there are some things you can do. The first thing you can do is you can delegate. It is okay to ask someone else to intervene, either there and then or after a time. You can escalate these behaviors to senior staff members, line managers, allies. It is okay to go, I saw this, I know it's not right, I know I need to do something about it, but I know I'm not the one to do it. You can delay. You don't need to always call something out then and there. It might feel like the right thing to do, but it's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes it is better to speak to the person afterwards. I think some of our colleagues were upset by, I was upset by, how do you think it felt to be on the receiving end of X, Y, and Z? I sometimes try and imagine it like telling someone they've got food in their teeth. You're mortified, they're mortified, but when the dust settles, you're both grateful you had the conversation. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, you do it there and then. And other times you wait until there's a quiet moment. You can distract, you can change the conversation. If you are witnessing something and you just don't know what to do, you can interrupt, you can change the focus, you can bring them back to your patient, to something else. You can make a joke, you can refocus the team on a task, but you can certainly break that toxic, unprofessional flow of behaviors and attitudes. And finally, of course, you can declare. You can call it out there and then. You should probably use kind of non-threatening, change and learning based words rather than blame. Look, I can tell that everyone's really stressed here, but I wonder if there's anything I can do to help. I wonder if there's anything anyone can do to bring things back down to earth. The other thing to do is to recognize that in most flavors of healthcare, both animal and people centered, there tends to be a bit of a culture of blame, a 0 to 60 thing. You're either fine or you're being summoned to the boss's room. And actually there's a really good process out there called the Vanderbilt cup of coffee model. What that says is that most of us, most of the time, are fine. We live, we learn, we make mistakes. People tell us that we've made a mistake, we move on. But sometimes there's a concern, something happens. The Vanderbilt model talks about an informal cup of coffee. So I make a mistake at work. I make a stupid, unacceptable, unprofessional comment. And someone takes me to one side and goes, Simon, can I buy you a drink? So we're not in my office or their office. It's not via email. There's no record of it. And I have this informal cup of coffee conversation that is basically a unstructured feedback conversation. And the evidence suggests that over 90% of people will change their behavior on the basis of that conversation. However, what we need is a system of accountability, because we all know those people who've had so many of those informal chats and they keep going. The Vanderbilt model says that if an apparent pattern starts to declare itself, you then have what's called an awareness intervention. That's what one of my friends calls a no coffee for you conversation. That is in an office, that does have an email chain. And that's look, Simon, we've spoken about this before, but I wonder if we could talk about the comments you've made, how that makes people feel, and why that goes against our values, why it's not okay, why we'd like to help you change. And then maybe that pattern persists. Then you need what's called a guided intervention by authority. That's where perhaps someone a bit more powerful, a bit more important, sits them down and explains in perhaps less reflective terms why those behaviors are not tolerated, why they are not okay. And finally, you have the peak of the Vanderbilt pyramid, if you like, what they call a disciplinary intervention. That's where you've had a cup of coffee chat, an awareness intervention, a guided intervention by authority, and the behaviors are still persisting. That's when you are sent home on gardening leave. That is when you get reported to a regulator. Now, of course, certain behaviors bypass some of those steps. Certain behaviors mandate reviews at different levels. And that Vanderbilt model ties in nicely with the bystander training. Maybe you're not the one to have that cup of coffee. Maybe you need to delegate it. Maybe you want to have that cup of coffee conversation, but you need to delay it. What I would say is, we know that these behaviors harm not only our patients, but also our colleagues and our profession. But there are things you can do, and they may feel small, and they may feel like they're not these big, performative, explosive, heads will roll, blame-orientated things. But actually, it's through these little changes, if we make them sustainable, that we can change culture for the better of everyone. Thank you very much.